You're listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Welcome back to another episode, and our first of 2021. On January 13th of this year, Chief Justice Susan Larson Christensen gave the condition of the judiciary to a joint audience of the Iowa Senate and House of Representatives from the Capitol building in Des Moines. This address is an opportunity for the judicial branch to reflect on all of the progress the court's made in the prior year and set goals and intentions for the year to follow. The condition of the judiciary is accompanied by a budget request to the Iowa General Assembly, who is responsible for allocating our branch's government budget, as well as an annual report, which highlights what the court was able to accomplish from the year before. All of the information presented to the General Assembly to help them determine the next fiscal year's budget is available to the public on our website. There will be links to each document included in the episode description. To explore the topics covered in this year's Condition of the Judiciary and 2021's annual report, I sat down with Bob Gast, the Judicial Branch's State Court Administrator, and District 1 Chief Judge Kellyann Lekar. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today, Chief Judge Lekar. Can you give us a bit of background on your path to the bench?
Sure. I spent about 12 years in private practice in Northeast Iowa, engaging in a general civil practice, which also included juvenile court work. This type of practice kept me in the courthouse quite a bit, and I got to know many of our D1 judges. When Judge Jim Beagley was retiring, he encouraged me to apply. I was appointed in 2005, and interestingly was the first female district court judge appointed in Judicial Election District 1B. After being appointed, I found out that not only do I really enjoy being a judge, I also enjoy understanding how the judicial branch operates as a whole from an administrative perspective and the role we play as the third branch of government. Those interests prompted me to get more and more involved in committees and to be really generally aware of how the judicial branch was operating, which then naturally led to my interest in serving as the chief judge. Judge Tom Bauer was named to the Court of Appeals for my district in late 2011, and so the position of chief judge became available in D1. I was named chief judge in January of 2012. I truly enjoy being chief judge, although often it feels like I have two full-time jobs, as chief judges in Iowa are expected to carry a full-time judicial docket as well as serve in the capacity of chief judge. To borrow a phrase from the military, it is the toughest job you'll ever love, and I have to say that is true for me. My favorite part of being chief judge is that I sit on the Judicial Council, which is made up of the chief judges of the 8 judicial districts and the chief judge of the Court of Appeals and the chief justice of the Supreme Court. The job of the Judicial Council is to give advice to the Supreme Court in administering the judicial branch.
On top of all of that, you were also a part of the Lemonade Task Force, which is a large section of what Chief Justice Christensen discussed in her Condition of the Judiciary and our annual report. Can you tell us a bit about what this task force is, what it's addressing, and how you became involved?
Yes. So the slightly more official name of the Lemonade Task Force is the Lessons Learned Task Force. And perhaps that says it more directly in terms of what the task force was intended to do. The purpose of the task force was to take a look back on the year or so that we had just come through with the height of the first wave of the pandemic, and to decide what lessons we had learned about the administration of justice in Iowa. Our goal was to be intentional with regard to the decisions we made going forward, so that we incorporated the lessons we had learned and to make sure that we continued those pandemic-related practices that we had developed in a hurry in response to COVID, but to implement them in a more thoughtful and forward-looking way so that we could reap the benefit of those successful new practices moving forward. What I loved about the task force is that it was set up to be multidisciplinary. We had judges, court administration, clerks and court reporters, as well as members of the bar and legal community. It was really nice to have a variety of different perspectives on the issues we were discussing. I became involved with the task force when Chief Justice Christensen asked me to serve as the Chief Judge Representative.
And what was the process of the Lessons Learned Task Force like when it came to deciding which of those emergency orders signed during COVID should be continued?
All of our meetings took place via video conferencing, which was a complex task simply because there were a number of us on the task force, and we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to be heard. But of course, we've all vastly improved our video conferencing skills in the past 2 years. A number of our representatives came from all around the state, so meeting via video conference was a convenient way to meet. What we did is we used the emergency orders that the Supreme Court had put in place at the beginning of the pandemic, and we would go through each one of them paragraph by paragraph in order to discuss what new practices and policies were not only really working well during the pandemic, but would continue to work well into the future, versus what practices and policies were really only designed to get us through the pandemic, and we should revert back to our former practices as we continue to move forward in returning to normal operations. Hence the name, the Lessons Learned Task Force. Because there were a number of orders that we needed to work our way through, we would select 1 or 2 orders per meeting, and then before each meeting, we would circulate a written commentary between the members of the task force so that each member had the opportunity to provide comments or thoughts about those particular orders before we actually had our meeting. This allowed us to really hone in on those topics that already had general agreement versus those that would take more in-depth discussion. The 2 topics that generated the most conversations were which processes that we had converted to being able to being conducted in writing could remain a written procedure versus an in-court proceeding, and then the parameters for how and when hearings could take place via video conference.
And like I mentioned before, we colloquially within the branch know it as the Lemonade Task Force, and it kind of got that name from the common phrase, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. What do you view as the positive outcomes from the Lessons Learned Task Force that was created out of necessity during these really unprecedented times?
Well, I would say that the judicial branch, like the rest of the world, learned some very fast lessons on how to use and benefit from video conferencing for both court proceedings and administrative meetings. We have been able to convert those lessons into some very long-term changes for the continuing use of video court proceedings. We no longer use video conference hearings simply because they keep people safe from COVID. We now use them because they allow us to administer justice more effectively and efficiently, to act more swiftly when the interest of criminal defendants or the safety of children is involved, to hold hearings that are less disruptive to the lives of litigants, and to access experts and other witnesses who would otherwise have limited availability. The judicial branch made excellent use of CARES Act funding to improve both audio and video technology in nearly every courtroom in the state of Iowa. These type of technology advances would have taken years and maybe even decades to reach if they had not been accelerated by the needs caused by the pandemic. Those are some of the positive outcomes in our court system. As far as a more personal positive outcome from the Lemonade Task Force, it was a very positive experience for me because it was an example of not only the various components of the judicial branch coming together to achieve a goal and to steer our judicial branch in terms of its long-term vision, but it was an excellent melding of the judicial branch with many other legal community partners, such as the Bar Association, the County Attorneys Association, the State Public Defender's Office, Iowa Legal Aid, and various other legal groups. I think we really used that opportunity to strengthen many of those relationships, and that to me is another positive outcome of the pandemic. Many different legal constituencies being reminded that in the end we are all working together for the administration of justice that is fair, strong, and efficient.
Thank you so much for all of your insight into the Lessons Learned Task Force today, Judge Lekar. I appreciate it. Thank you for sitting down with me today, Bob. Before we dive into today's topic, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and what led you to your new role as state court administrator for the Iowa Judicial Branch?
Sure. I'm a longtime Iowa boy. Grew up born and raised in Iowa. After high school, I went to college for a while in Iowa and then joined the U.S. military, where I finished my college degree in political science, and then came back to Iowa and worked in private industry for about 9 years, and then came to the court as a finance and personnel manager in the 4th District of Iowa, which is in southwest Iowa. And then I worked in Omaha as the deputy court administrator in the 4th District of Nebraska for 9 years, and then was hired as the district court administrator back in the 4th District of Iowa. And after that, I applied and became the state court administrator.
And this month, we are walking through the yearly Condition of the Judiciary and annual report, which the state court administrator and team are heavily involved with. What is one of the areas that our branch is trying to address for the 2023 fiscal year, which will begin in July of 2022?
The Rural Courts Initiative has been a program that has been in 3 of the last budgets, and I think it's a big cog in our branch moving forward. And last year, I want to thank the legislature for funding that initiative fully, and it allowed us to bring people into our offices that ensures that we will be able to keep the rural courthouses open and ensures that they will remain a vital part of our organization and help the rural communities at the same time. And that process was already going when I took over as a job, and I'm just continuing the process that was started by my predecessor in the job and by the previous Chief Justice as well. And so us continuing to make that program relevant will help us in the long run with our rural counties.
What are some of the biggest challenges that rural courthouses and staff are still experiencing right now?
Right now, I think one of our biggest areas where we're facing a challenge is retirement of our longtime employees. It's a brain drain, if you will. We're getting quality new employees that are applying and are very good employees, but just losing sometimes up to 35 years of experience can be a very hard thing. And finding time to get the new employees trained and up to speed can take a while. And so I think that's a large area from our point that we're hurting in the branch, and also the lack of attorneys, quite honestly, in the rural counties. There's just not a lot of attorneys in some rural counties that are able to practice. And so it can be hard to schedule court hearings and that kind of thing because the same attorney is handling numerous cases.
Despite some of the challenges that our rural counties can face, what advances have we seen in recent years to help support them?
I think last year, again, with the Rural Courts Initiative being funded by the legislature, we were able to add positions in those rural courts, which helped us tremendously, not only in advancing the Rural Courts Initiative, but it allowed us to get proper staffing in there so we're able to do more things, such as distributive work processing, which kind of goes hand in hand with the Rural Courts Initiative. And that allows us to process work from anywhere in our district in any county. And so those folks can do work wherever they're seated. They don't have to be seated in the county where they're doing work for. We are also able to upgrade through COVID using CARES Act funds. We were able to upgrade our audio-visual equipment in every courtroom, and it helped the rural counties a lot because a lot of those systems that were in place were aged. And so we were able to get new digital equipment in there that helps us not only to hear, it helps the jurors to see, and it allows us to have up-to-date ways to show evidence in trials. And it's just a better system all around for all the users, including staff and judicial officers. And then also we started a program last year where a study was done showing we needed 20 more district associate judges statewide. Last year, again, the legislature was very nice to fund us for 4 positions. And this year we have again asked for 4 more district associate judge positions that will again help us to spread out the workload and address a need that we have in the rural communities.
What else do you hope to see addressed in the next year to help and continue uplifting and supporting our rural communities and their needs?
Our duties are evolving in the rural communities and in courts in general, but especially in conjunction with the Rural Courts Initiative and distributive work processing. It's a constant process to upgrade those positions. And this year's budget is very much concentrated on looking at all of our employees, from judicial officers on down, on better ways we can compensate them for the great work they are doing. That was a major focus. And then again, this year, as I mentioned before, we're asking for 4 more district associate judges to help even out that workload. And I really think this year's focus is to make sure we can support our folks in the field by asking for what we've asked for in this year's budget.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and expertise on this issue.
Thank you.
You've been listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast hosted and produced by me, Marissa Gaal. If you would like more information about Iowa's courts, you can visit www.iowacourts.gov. You can also follow the Iowa Judicial Branch on Twitter and YouTube at Iowa Courts. This episode of In the Balance is now adjourned. Until next time.